Hi, my name is Sydney Marshall. I'm the curator here at the Christian Peterson Art Museum, which is located in the first floor of Morrill Hall. In this tour, we're going to show you a few objects from the current exhibition that's in the Christian Peterson Art Museum. It's called Double Take, Insights on Figural Expression. And so we'll really go through some of the objects that are focused on the topic for your class today. But overall, Christian Peterson Art Museum is a portion of university museums as a whole. So we have this space here in 1017 Morrill Hall, and then downstairs in the basement is another gallery as well for Christian Peterson Art Museum, but we also have the Anderson Sculpture Garden, which is surrounding Morrill Hall, the Bernier Art Museum in Sheeman Building, the Farmhouse Museum, which is across from Ross Hall, and then the Art on Campus collection, which is across campus in many different public spaces and is one of the largest collections of public art on a university campus. So after you watch this video, we definitely recommend you come and see the exhibition so you can see all the objects that are in the exhibition. The Christian Peterson Art Museum is open Monday through Friday from 10 to 4. And it's always free admission, and we also have events and other things throughout the semester too, so that you can come to visit. And then if you want more information or just to confirm the hours and things like that, you can visit museums.iastate.edu. Our first object that we're going to talk about is Nocturne 5. It's by Karen Lamont. And in this, we have two objects by her in the exhibition, and this is one that is always here in Morrill Hall. It's part of the Art on Campus collection. And I think it's a good example of depicting the form in a stylized way, because as you can see, there is no head or arms, or the form is not actually present. So this is created through 3 sections of cast glass, so that then you can see the seams here where they're kind of pieced together then by created molds, which is the cast form. So there are molds that are then poured in with glass to create the shape. Really showing the folds of the fabric, but in a way that really accentuates the body. You can definitely see a feminine form underneath the dress. This is something that Karen Lamont became very well known for creating this kind of new way of depicting the nude in a very clothed way, but still kind of the focus of the body and the form of the body as well. She will also have others in her series that are kind of crouching or kind of sprawling figures, but again, just depicting that motion through the folds of her dress. And we'll have another example of kind of the contrast between cultural differences in depicting what is beautiful or kind of classic beauty. When I look at this one, I very much think of like classical Greek, or on our campus, the Marston Muses, figures that are kind of definitely idealized forms, and figures of beauty that are almost like, to me, muse or godlike in their kind of draped fabric. And in this way, the idea of like what is feminine, what is something that you dress up to accentuate your body or to accentuate what is considered beautiful in your culture. So moving from the large-scale glass Karen Lamont that we just saw downstairs, we're going to move to this much smaller maquette size. So this is also by Karen Lamont. And this is something where, as she became well-known creating these really large-scale glass forms of the body, she became known as basically showing the nude in a different way by draping it with all this clothing, but still definitely showing the form of the body. And as she was really kind of reflecting on her art and her the figures that she was choosing to represent, she kind of had this realization that her view of beauty and her view of like a nice nude form was very much informed by her upbringing and like the Western standard of beauty. So she worked with basically an educational organization with Japan, and she was able to move to Japan for multiple months and really studied really closely the way that kimonos were represented and created, everything down from the dyeing of the silk to the weaving of the fabric, and like how even like the knots and the way that the garment is constructed really means something and has a meaning for that culture in a way to present beauty. And so as she was doing this, it was a challenge for herself to really think of a different way of representing the body. In both of these works of art, the actual human figure is gone, right? It is just the garment. But the focus of each of those garments are very different. So in the first one we saw, it's draping, but you are definitely seeing the body underneath. Where with the kimono, it's very much a focus of the kimono, and the garment is the beautiful object. The body that is wearing it underneath is really not to be like highlighted or fit to the shape of the person. So like if you have curves or things like this with the kimono, the ideal shape is like a cylinder to then highlight the kimono. So they will like add padding to kind of disguise like the individual person's form, and then build with the kimono off of that. So in a very different way, right? Like there is no, other than the crouching form of the body, in comparison to the glass work of art, you aren't seeing that physical form underneath. She created a huge body of work basically over 8 years surrounding the kimono, both with the materiality. She used ceramics, which was kind of a departure for her, and a way to experiment with a new medium and a new way of depicting those garments. But she did also use glass. And it's something that I really like in this different format of the kimono is in this one, and also in some of her larger scale works of art, you can really see the weave of the material, and that she really kind of put into focus like how that garment lays and is like a presence in a different way, but in a similar way of the draping. They have different goals, but they both kind of depict this cultural beauty. There is then the conversation of, so Karen Lamont works in Prague. She's an American artist. And it's something I think with your class to think about, like at what point is something, honoring the culture? Is it cultural appropriation to depict other works of art or other, art forms of the kimono in her art or not? And I think that's definitely a discussion. With her approach, she's, like I said, she spent 8 years creating this body of work and spent a lot of time working with the artists and the craftsmen behind each aspect of the kimono making, and really understood the culture. So in terms of her getting to kind of explore what her concept of beauty is and really challenging what the like accepted norm is for the Western culture, and kind of pushing back on that to show that they are both, in fact, beautiful forms of highlighting the figure, is, I think, another way to respectfully do that. But yeah, it kind of, I think, depends on your perspective. So as a contrast for the Karen Lamont two sculptures that we just talked about, I'm showing a selection of, there's 3 Manuel Neri paintings behind me. So these are something where I think it's interesting to think about, what is the power of the gaze of the artist on the subject? So as we saw with Karen Lamont, she's really exploring how the form is either concealed to showcase the garment, or draped, but really to like accentuate the body. Where here we have Manuel Neri, who is taking 3 magazine images, which you can see, but they are pretty covered up with paint, and taking them and really concealing the figure and all of its distinguishing aspects there to create his own image. So in the center figure, I think, is the example that has the least amount of like disguising paint on there. So it definitely still looks like a young person. You still have the eyes and kind of the hopeful gaze upwards. And there's definitely less concealing of the distinguishing figures in the center image. To the right, they're paired together because they have a very similar profile. They're also a part of the Cabeza studies that he did. But to me, the right image is a much different tone and a different interpretation as the viewer, because it's really every distinguishing aspect of the face is covered by this really kind of intense dark paint. And to me, the tone of both of them is very different. So to me, it's like when you are kind of removing the individual aspects of a form, what does that change for the viewer? And then we finally have the last image, which is a sitting or standing study by Manuel Neri. He did many of these. Again, it is a magazine image of a woman, but the figure is kind of just disguised with the pink paint, and the form of the body is shown through these kind of gestural marks for the breast and to show like the action of the body and the motion, which is pretty common in Neri's work. But I think in terms of this conversation for this class, the idea of, again, who is depicting that form and how does that add a different tone to it. So in this, right, we're talking about the concealing of different aspects, but again, the artist's hand literally in this, I think, adds a different tone. So if you zoom in the pelvis, there is a very distinct fingerprint there. And to me, thinking of who is viewing this model, who is kind of covering up the distinguishing figures, adds definitely a different tone to the work of art. So our next object that we're going to be talking about is titled Dolores, a Warrior for All Living Beings. So it's by the artist Fabiana Rodriguez. And she is somebody who is a very contemporary artist. She's currently working. She identifies as a queer artist who really got her start as a political poster creator. So she has this tie with fine arts, but also is definitely producing a lot of material that is meant to be, publicly consumed and at a wider scale, I would say. She also is an activist who has created and founded multiple political organizations and nonprofits. And this work of art is really her kind of honoring Dolores Huerta. So Dolores Huerta is an activist also, so it kind of makes sense that Fabiana would take inspiration from Dolores. So she is a Latin American activist and really was working for Chicano rights at the time in the 70s. She co-founded the United Farm Workers Association with Cesar Chavez. And I think this is kind of an interesting example of honoring someone and what is their public memory. This may not be the same for you, but I definitely had heard much more about Cesar Chavez as a child than I did Dolores Huerta. And I think sometimes it is, how are people remembered for their contributions that I think is an interesting of why are some people being memorialized more than others. With Dolores, she is somebody who worked again with the United Farm Workers Association and really advocated for rights and aspects of labor rights that at the time especially would really have more of an effect on women workers. So things like childcare and hours and the conditions of the movement at that time for the labor rights. She also has done a lot of work with environmental activism. So in this title, right, of Dolores Huerta, Warrior for All Living Beings, she is depicted not as just her individual contributions, but almost as this figure of Mother Earth. She is seen as cradling and kind of protecting the globe, and is stylized in a way to show, lots of natural forms around her. There's a cactus, there's a monarch butterfly in the corner that represents immigration rights that she also worked for. And then in the back here, we have this blue dog that is a traditional design for Mexican-American dogs. And so with all of that, it's something to kind of honor this person's contributions, but really kind of say that it's not just one individual's contributions, but really it affects kind of all of us working together towards a larger movement. So after seeing something that is a memorial and in honor of someone, we're going to look at two different self-portraits. So in terms of like the content of the exhibition, these are two images of faces that at first glance definitely don't look very stylized, but in terms of kind of self-reflection and kind of identity of oneself, I think that's something to consider in terms of what are the layers of interpretation or meaning we add to our own faces and our own images of ourselves and our like self-worth. So for this first example, we have Mirror. It was made in 1961 by Beth Van Hosen. And something that I think is interesting also in contrast to Neri, she was working in the Bay Area of this time when this kind of more abstracted forms and kind of expressionist art was becoming much more popular and valued. And she took this a very different approach, right, and was doing printmaking, particularly of animals, really detailed prints of animals, kind of everyday scenes of people, flowers, and kind of just like everyday scenes of life. And that was seen at the time as not really respected, likely because it was also a woman doing this and kind of showing like women's scenes of life. She has since gained much more respect, which is good. Her printmaking is definitely very detailed and very skillful. For this one in particular, she's using like an etching technique. So that's where you are etching into metal, and there's remainder that's left in, and you're dipping in acid to then kind of etch away the lines. So in that method, she's creating all of these prints, and really with this image doing a self-portrait. So the stylization is the fact that there are all of these mirrors surrounding her. So you have the central image, which looks, like a pretty standard person staring into the mirror, examining themselves. But I think on the side images of the person in profile, you see kind of different layers of thinking about oneself and one's life. So to me, the thing that is most obvious in change is kind of her eyebrows and her eye expression. In some, I think she looks kind of concerned and looking kind of deeply at her reflection, where others she may look a little bit more hopeless or sad, where in the center figure, I think she looks pretty neutral and kind of looking forward ahead into her future. And that's, I think, something with the addition of this other self-portrait of thinking about how do you present yourself to the world, kind of in connection with the kimono and the dress by Karen Lamont, and like what you're presenting kind of outwardly, and then how do you think about yourself when you're looking at the mirror, and how do you kind of present your own identity based off of like physical reflection. And then we'll go and talk about this other self-portrait. So this is another one that does not look really too stylized. Both with the mirror and the self-portrait by BRENT HOLLAND, the gaze is very intense for the central figure. Something that maybe at first glance we may think this is what they're seeing, this is what they're portraying as kind of like a true to mirror image of this person. I think kind of as you look closer, there are aspects that may be exaggerated, like his gaze is very intense. There are portions of the face that are so added on with paint that they become more three-dimensional and almost like a relief painting compared to the rest of the surface. And that definitely draws your eyes to things like his mole, again, his kind of furrowed brow, and the very intense eyes. And so this may be a realistic view of this person, but I also think with the idea of self-portraiture, your self-image, like what are the things of your image that you focus on and kind of give a lot of weight to that maybe your friends or your family may not notice at all. And so I think with these two images of the least stylized figures, the more like internal interpretation is kind of added to those two. Thank you for watching. If you would like more information, definitely come to visit the exhibition. So it's Monday through Friday from 10 to 4 through the end of this semester. And then you can also visit our website at museums.istate.edu. This space and the museums are for you to use. We want you to be able to use it in any way that you would like. So we have many free events throughout the semester. And you can find out more information about those either on our website, or you can follow us on social media through either Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook too. So thanks. Hope to see you sometime this semester.